the first thing I want to ask you about is, you're in the analytical space. I'm wondering, what's your background with numbers? Like, was that something you studied in college, or, kind of what's your background with, math basically?
Yeah, I got into uh, statistics in high school, kind of through baseball at
Hmm.
first, and reading Moneyball, and
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think it was a pretty common way to get interested. And I took like an AP Stats class in high school that I really did like. It's probably like my favorite class.
Mhm.
And then I went to Villanova in college, and they didn't have a statistics program. So I went in the business school there, and my minor was business analytics. So I definitely did get somewhat of further
Yeah.
education, but a lot of it has been more of wanting to figure out how to answer something first about baseball, then about basketball, and kind of reading things or Googling my way through it, more so than the formal education. But then afterwards, I did get some formal education.
Right. Okay. So you touched on your time at Nova quick. Just what were some of your interests there? Were you always, studying basketball, or did that happen organically?
Yeah, I've always been, I guess I would just say, obsessed with basketball, whether or not I was studying it.
Mhm.
But I had the Hoop Vision. It was a Twitter account and a blog at the time
Yeah.
in college, um, and I also did some consulting as an undergrad for
Yeah.
New Mexico State, who I would eventually go on to work for. So that was probably the my first really big thing. Was, I want to say, the 2013 season or something like that. I sent pretty much like a weekly report
Yep.
to New Mexico State.
Okay. So then I read you went to GA for Eric Musselman at Nevada. So I'm curious. I like asking people, how they network and stuff like that. How did you
Hmm.
land that job, or that, GA job?
Yeah, I've got the Nevada gear on
There
right
you go.
here. I So actually, that is, it's it's an interesting story from a networking perspective, for sure. It's definitely not like the typical way.
Yeah.
That's the tough part about giving advice on this type of thing, is I don't know how reproducible what I did was. It was also a different time where there wasn't quite as much like basketball content on the internet. It was a little
Right.
bit easier to stand out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what happened was, Muss sent me an email when he was at Arizona State as an associate head coach, just saying keep up the good work. He had seen the Twitter account or the blog or something,
Mhm.
and the email didn't say a whole lot. But I then asked him, or I said, "Thanks so much. Is there something that you'd like me to look at with your team, analytically, or whatever it was?" And so I
Right.
ended up doing it. I put it on. It was a public thing. It wasn't like private or consulting or anything.
Yeah.
But I did something on Arizona State. Sent it to him. He really liked it, and we never really talked again, which was probably a mistake on my end to not continue the networking relationship. But then years later, I have now graduated college, and he gets the head job at Nevada. And there was a GA posting on Hoop Dirt, which I'm sure
Yep.
you're familiar with.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, yeah, and it was just on Hoop Dirt. I think usually around those days, I was sending whatever they wanted application wise, but also I was doing some type of data or analytics work on the team I was applying for, just like
Yeah.
to stand out.
Right.
And so I sent it over, and fortunately, the director of basketball operations at the time at Nevada was also with Muss at Arizona State, and he was kind of the one that remembered me
Right.
from the time before. And I still had to interview, and it was a long process, but that's how
Yeah.
I got the job.
Yeah, no, those Hoop Dirt postings, I never know like what's up to date because there's just so much stuff on there now. But that's
Yes. So most job postings are already filled before
yeah,
you actually see them on the internet. But
right.
I would say that GA spots are probably the one that aren't.
Yeah,
Or, I mean, sometimes they probably
right.
are filled. But like an assistant coaching job does not get filled through
Yeah, no,
applying through Hoop Dirt.
and
It's not
like
not
the
how it
prep,
works.
100%. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
the prep school stuff though,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of a good database for that stuff too. But okay, so then you went to New Mexico State as video coordinator. I know you said you did some work with them prior, but
Mhm.
obviously you get there and that job, you obviously worked your ass off. That's a really, time consuming job just from what I see our video coordinator doing. Just kind of talk about what you learned in that role and how you use it today.
Yeah, no, you're right about the hard work with the video role. I think ops and video both have their separate challenges and their grinds. I would not want to be an ops guy by any means, but so the difference between the two really is there's you're both you're always on someone else's time with both of them, you know.
Yep.
But with video, it's more so with your assistant coaches and your head coaches, so people within your organization. And with ops, it's people outside. So like
Right.
the hotel staff and the food people and whatever. And you have even less control over them when in that ops role. It can be because the fact of the matter is that men's basketball or college athletics works on a very fast time schedule and wants things done, and those other people aren't always working on that same time schedule, and that's what makes the ops job extremely stressful. Yeah, I did a little bit of ops work at Nevada as a GA.
Yeah.
Video wise is a little bit different. It's fun from a basketball perspective, getting breaking down games, scouting opponents. Obviously, I use a lot of that currently in my job. And then the other thing that I'm proud of what we did at New Mexico State was how we use sports code, and doing some pretty advanced stuff with our video workflow. And yeah, that's another thing that obviously I still do with hoop vision stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So, I know you're big into, actions and stuff like that. I see your tweets all the time. So right now I'm not into that stuff yet just because I'm still playing, but like obviously if
Mhm.
I do video coordinator, like that's probably where I'll learn most of that. So is that where you saw all this stuff and you really dove into it and got interested in it? Because obviously when you clip a game, you see like just one possession at a time.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think scouting is watching other teams
Yeah.
is ultimately where you learn the game.
Hmm.
One thing that really clicked with me, um, my second year at New Mexico State, we had a coaching change, and the year before, I'd done a lot of personnel scouting. So opposing tendencies of
Yeah.
does he like to drive left and right, which is significantly different than the actions and sets.
Right.
It's a different skill set for sure, and I like the team scouting more than the personnel scouting. That's just my preference.
Mhm.
But I started to get more into the team stuff my second year, and Coach Jans, who's still the head coach at New Mexico State, he has his terminology is unique. He doesn't use NBA terminology or standardized
Yeah.
terminology at all, which a guy who I know gets talked about as having his own terminology as well is John Beeline. When he got
Mhm.
to the NBA, there was some fuss about the
Yeah.
NBA players not being willing to learn his terminology, and so Jan's kind of similar in that way with very specific terms, and by using them, by learning his system, it really, I thought, took my X's and O's game up another level to have words for everything that I was seeing. And it's hard to contribute in a coaching meeting if you don't know all the terminology,
Right.
obviously.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a pretty big step forward, for me personally.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the terms. Just you hear the coaches yell out stuff and I'm learning them every day. There's just something, I thought I knew a little bit about basketball, but when I got to Winthrop, it's like, wow, these guys are freaking geniuses. Um,
There's levels. There's
yeah,
levels.
no,
Yeah,
100%,
yeah.
100%. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about the hoop vision stuff.
Mhm.
Obviously, you founded that. Just kind of tell me about the process of, that idea and then ultimately, where it is today.
Yeah. So that I did briefly mention, but it started as a junior in high school for me. I
Hmm.
think I had started a baseball blog maybe a year or two before that, and yeah, I was always basketball first, college basketball specifically.
Yeah.
my Twitter handle is HoopVision68 because I wanted to cover the 68 teams that had a chance of making the NCAA. So, for example, Winthrop would have been a team that I wanted to cover, like with a very good chance of making the NCAA tournament. And I've gotten away from that a little bit, but I at the time there was this website blog called the Mid Majority, which is still kind of around now. But I was really into mid-major basketball.
Yeah.
I was really into analytics, and I was getting into X's and O's. So it was all three of those things. No one was reading it early on. I didn't even have my name on it. I didn't want anyone to know that I was in high school.
Right.
And yeah, so my name was nowhere on it. In college, that changed dramatically because I
Right.
wanted to get a job.
Yeah.
So you have
You
to
learn real
be
quick. That's where I'm
right,
at.
right. You have to be self-promotional. And yeah, really not many people were reading it in college either. It was, the clicks and page views are very small, but the people that were reading it were like college basketball
Yeah.
coaches.
Quality
And
over
so
quantity.
exactly, yeah. And it didn't lead to a job right away for me. But the Nevada job was the first one, and I had always thought about returning to the content space. I had Ben Falk on my podcast today, but what he did with Cleaning the Glass and a subscription site,
Yeah.
that didn't really exist when I started in college. Not that I would have been able to make any money anyways,
Right.
but as I kept going, there became more of a model for you can do this
Yeah.
for a full-time living.
No, so what I'm curious about is that's an interesting dynamic. Were you still doing the Hoop Vision stuff while on staff at Nevada and New Mexico State?
Not really. I pretty much stopped tweeting. I would be curious to go back and actually look, but my recollection is that I really didn't tweet much.
Yeah.
And I stopped the blog. But one thing that I did start doing was a newsletter, which I only did about 4 or 5 of them in like a year period.
Mm-hmm.
But I liked the newsletter while working for teams because it was a little bit more private than the thing that I didn't want. I didn't want it to. When you're part of a coaching staff, you're all about the staff and you're working for your boss, and so you don't want to come off looking too much about yourself. But the newsletter was a pretty good way to, I thought it was going to get me my next job when I originally started the newsletter. A lot of coaches were reading it. I wasn't putting it out very often. And I was kind of like hinting that, obviously I'm working for a team right now and I can't really say everything, but that could maybe lead to offline conversations or something like that. And I think just like you're doing with this podcast, it's a way to get a job, by making content.
100%. Yeah. Okay. The one thing I skipped over that I read about in your bio was it was an internship, but you worked at ESPN Stats and Info.
Yep.
How was that? And like, what did you do there?
Yeah. So, one summer in college, right, the year before I graduated, I had that Stats and Info internship, which was in Bristol, Connecticut. And it was a really cool summer for sure. I did 20 hours a week with one section of the ESPN Stats and Info group and 20 hours a week with the other. The first 20 was really kind of like, I guess, boring, like data entry, making sure everything on ESPN.com is right and things like that. But the other 20 hours was with their analytics group, which was kind of new at the time, but Dean Oliver was actually running it. He left a couple of years later, but he's like the godfather of basketball analytics. And for them, it was more analytical type projects. I did a lot of college football stuff because that was their big thing at the time, but they knew that basketball was my thing and let me, I think I did a fouling. It wasn't fouling up 3, but some kind of foul research that I like presented to Dean and a few other people. And so they took kind of the basketball thing seriously. But ultimately it wasn't really something that I was all that interested in pursuing after college. It was a really fun summer internship though,
Yeah,
for
that sounds
sure.
like a really good experience. Okay, so back to the hoop vision stuff. I came across your tweets probably like a couple months ago. I sent you that email, and then what I thought was interesting about your tweets or your videos was that you show the action, like the screen. You know what I'm talking
Mhm.
about? The little. How did you
Mhm.
how did you get that idea to do that? Because like as a consumer, that makes it like 100% like easier to understand.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. It was definitely calculated, but it evolved over time. So Twitter has been, from a business perspective, Twitter has been really important. It's how people find me. It's how they end up paying for certain things
Yeah,
within my business. And so really the idea was, okay, I'm getting a lot of views or retweets or likes or whatever on these
yeah,
tweets. But I need them to hit the follow button.
yeah. Right.
Essentially,
Yeah.
you need
No.
to keep them there. And so that was one of the biggest things for those animations, was like, stand out a little bit. There's a lot of people putting out really interesting stuff, X's and O's wise, on Twitter, but it evolved. At first, I wasn't. It didn't move as the play was moving. So if you look very early on,
Right.
and they were still pretty good videos, but the animations I look at now and I kind of cringe. They just like, as someone was running to set a screen, I would flash the
Right.
screen,
Yeah.
instead of now where they're running with the
Hmm.
player. And it's time consuming. I've gotten quicker at them, but it is time consuming. I think you could argue that maybe I go a little bit overboard sometimes, but it's definitely
No,
become my thing.
I think that's I've never seen anything like that, man. That's really good.
I actually, one of my reservations early on was like, are people going to feel like I'm insulting their intelligence? Like, I know a pick is being set here, but
Right.
that was in my head. I don't think I've
No,
ever gotten that feedback before.
no,
So
no.
yeah.
I've
Yeah.
definitely learned some stuff from it. Okay, so the one thing I talked to Ken Palm a couple months ago, and I saw your podcast with him.
Yep.
Obviously, very interesting. So I know you guys did some work together. Like, just what did you guys, do and talk about? Because that's two smart guys talking hoops.
Yeah, he's a little bit smarter than me, but
Yeah.
in college, I think that was the first time, I guess, just like you, I reached out to Ken. I'd just been in this contest on teamrankings.com where he was a judge, and so I used that opportunity to reach out and see if he wanted help with anything. And we charted 3-point misses to see where rebounds go, basically.
Mhm.
And as we were doing that project, Kirk Goldsberry came out with something very similar for the NBA, except he did it with all this automated tracking data. So it was way better than ours, which we had to do by hand.
Yeah.
But it was still cool for me. It got my name out there a little bit. And yeah, I've stayed in touch with Ken. He came to a couple of our New Mexico State games. He's out in Utah. We
Mhm.
played Utah Valley in our conference. So I've seen him at a couple Final Fours, and yeah, he's a really good guy.
Another thing, you did draft research for the Sixers. How did that go, and how'd you get that opportunity? That's high level.
Yeah, so that's the most overrated part of my bio.
Yeah, that's Ken Palm said the same thing when I asked him about when he did stuff for the Rockets. He said the same exact thing.
Here's what happened there. I so I have a resume, obviously, um, that I was sending to different coaches and whatever. I get hired by, I don't know if it was Nevada or New Mexico State, and we have a SID, Sports Information Director, who writes the bio basically by taking my resume.
Yeah, right,
It wouldn't have been something that I would have necessarily included, but it was like intel or background
right.
draft research, meaning like I was Googling stuff about Jaleel Okafor and trying
Yeah,
to like character
like
type
public
stuff.
information stuff.
Exactly. I only did it for a few different players. The guy I knew who was with this, I think he might still be with the Sixers. We had met when I was at Villanova. The kind of the Philly connection,
Hmm.
and um, yeah, it was kind of a way to get the foot in the door, but it was not a big deal
Yeah,
by
no.
any means.
I just
Yeah.
I just saw that. I wanted to ask about it.